The wrench slipped from my oil-stained fingers as I heard my wife's voice drift through the garage window. 3 in the morning, and Bree was on the phone again, her tone honey-sweet in a way it hadn't been with me in months. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow, Denny. Wes will be at the shop all day." I froze under the hood of my '67 Mustang, the engine block suddenly feeling like a tombstone pressing down on my chest. Denny. As in Denny Powers, the same cocky quarterback who'd made my high school years miserable, now apparently making my marriage equally unbearable. "My name is Wes Farrow, and I fix classic cars for a living in Longview, Indiana. It's honest work in a dishonest world, and until 3 minutes ago, I thought I had an honest marriage too. Turns out I was wrong about that last part." "He's been so distracted lately," Bree continued, her voice carrying that particular laugh she used to reserve for me. "I swear, sometimes I think he cares more about those rusty old cars than his own family." "Well, sweetheart, at least the cars don't lie to me." I slid out from under the Mustang, wiping my hands on a rag that had seen better decades. Through the window, I could see Bree pacing in our kitchen, her silhouette backlit by the overhead light. She was wearing the silk nightgown I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she claimed was too fancy for every day. Apparently, phone calls with my old rival qualified as special occasions. "I know it's complicated," she was saying, "but I can't keep pretending everything's fine here. He's just so ordinary, you know? So predictable." Ordinary. That stung worse than the time I'd grabbed a live wire in this very garage. I'd worked my rear end off for 15 years to build this restoration business from nothing. I'd put Bree through real estate school, supported her when she started her own agency, and never once complained about the long hours or the stress that came with small-town entrepreneurship. But ordinary? Yeah, maybe I was guilty as charged. "Tomorrow at the Silver Lake Motel," Bree whispered. "Room 237. And Denny, wear that cologne I like." The line went quiet, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the stairs. I waited until the bedroom door closed before I allowed myself to move. My hands were shaking, not from the cold October air seeping through the garage walls, but from something much more dangerous. Rage, pure, undiluted, carefully controlled rage. I'd been married to Bree for 16 years. We had a 17-year-old daughter, Lila, who was currently at her friend Madison's house for the weekend. Our mortgage was nearly paid off, the business was finally turning a decent profit, and I'd been planning to surprise Bree with a second honeymoon to Hawaii for Christmas. Instead, I was standing in my garage at 3 in the morning, listening to my wife plan an affair with the same guy who used to stuff me in lockers. Life has a twisted sense of humor sometimes. I walked over to my workbench and sat down heavily on the stool I'd built from reclaimed barn wood. The garage was my sanctuary. Every tool in its place, every project organized and labeled. It was the one space in my life where everything made sense, where problems had solutions and broken things could be fixed. Too bad marriages didn't come with repair manuals. The smart thing would be to confront Bree in the morning, sit her down, tell her what I'd overheard, and try to work through whatever was broken between us. That's what the marriage counselor would recommend, the one Bree had been too busy to see for the past 6 months. But as I sat there in the dim light of my garage, surrounded by the ghosts of restored classics, I realized something important. I didn't want to be smart anymore. I was tired of being the understanding husband, the reliable provider, the guy who always took the high road. Maybe it was time to take a different route entirely. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done since high school. I looked up Denny Powers on social media. His profile picture showed him flexing in a gym mirror, his bio claiming he was a fitness influencer and lifestyle coach. His posts were a nauseating mix of workout videos, motivational quotes, and barely disguised advertisements for protein powder. 3,000 followers, not exactly what you'd call influential. But apparently, he was influential enough to catch my wife's attention. I scrolled through his recent posts, noting the expensive gym equipment and designer workout clothes. Either the fitness influencer business was more lucrative than I'd imagined, or Denny was living beyond his means. Given that he was the same guy who used to borrow lunch money from freshmen, I had my suspicions about which scenario was more likely. An idea began forming in my mind, not fully developed yet, but promising. Like the first sketch of a restoration project, rough around the edges but with potential. I closed the phone and walked back to the Mustang. The engine rebuild could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I had some planning to do. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that people stop paying attention to what you're actually capable of. They see the quiet guy in the garage, the one who doesn't make waves or demand attention, and they assume that's all there is to see. They forget that the quiet ones are usually the ones who notice everything. And I'd been noticing things about my wife for months now. The new clothes that were supposedly for client meetings, the sudden interest in fitness and nutrition, the way she'd started wearing perfume to run errands. I'd chalked it up to a midlife confidence boost, maybe even felt proud that she was taking better care of herself. Turns out, I should have been paying closer attention to who she was taking care of herself for. I spent the next hour making a list of everything I knew about Bree's recent behavior changes. The late nights at the office, the mysterious phone calls, the credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to, the way she'd started doing laundry separately, claiming she didn't want her delicate work clothes mixed with my greasy shop rags. By 4:30 in the morning, I had 3 pages of notes and the beginnings of a plan that would have impressed my old boxing coach, Ray Martinez. Ray always said the key to winning a fight wasn't throwing the hardest punch. It was knowing exactly where to throw it. I was starting to get a pretty clear picture of where Bree and Denny's weak spots might be. The sun was coming up by the time I finally went inside. Bree was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed with her back to my pillow. She looked peaceful, innocent even. If I hadn't heard that phone call, I might have crawled in beside her and pretended everything was normal for a few more hours. Instead, I took a shower, made coffee, and started my day like any other Saturday. Except this Saturday, I had a stop to make before opening the shop. The Silver Lake Motel was exactly the kind of place you'd expect for a clandestine affair, run down, discreet, and cheap enough that the charges wouldn't stand out on a credit card statement. It sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown pine trees and the kind of parking lot that had seen better decades. I drove past slowly, noting the layout and the position of room 237. Second floor, corner unit, with a clear view of the parking area. Perfect for watching comings and goings. My phone buzzed with a text from Bree. "Running errands today, don't wait up for lunch." I texted back, "No problem, love you." The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. If I was going to do this right, I needed to maintain the element of surprise. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The rest of Saturday passed in a haze of routine maintenance and careful observation. I changed the oil in Mrs. Henderson's Buick, tuned up Pastor Williams's pickup truck, and pretended to care about the Colts' chances this season when my customers wanted to chat. But my mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities like a mechanic examining a faulty transmission. Bree came home around 6, carrying shopping bags from stores I knew she hadn't visited. Her hair was different, styled in a way that suggested professional attention rather than a quick trip to the grocery store. She was wearing makeup too, the subtle kind that's supposed to look natural but actually takes considerable effort. "How was your day?" I asked, not looking up from the sports section. "Oh, boring errands. Traffic was terrible." She set the bags down and headed straight for the stairs. "I'm going to take a bath and then start dinner." "Sounds good. I'll be in the garage for another hour or so." She paused at the bottom of the stairs, and for a moment I thought she might say something real, something honest. Instead, she just smiled that practice smile she used on difficult clients. Don't work too late, honey. Honey. When was the last time she'd called me that and actually meant it? I waited until I heard the bathwater running before I went upstairs to our bedroom. Bree's purse was sitting on the dresser, and while I'd never been the type of husband to snoop through his wife's personal belongings, desperate times call for flexible ethics. Inside, I found the usual collection of receipts, business cards, and feminine necessities. But tucked behind her driver's license was something interesting. A business card for a women's boutique in Indianapolis, the kind of place that specialized in what the advertisements euphemistically called intimate apparel. The receipt was dated yesterday. $147 for items that definitely weren't meant for my benefit. I photographed the receipt with my phone and put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Then I went downstairs and did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I called Ray Martinez. Ray had been my boxing coach back when I thought I might actually make something of myself in the ring. That was before I realized I had better hands for fixing engines than breaking faces. But Ray had taught me more than just how to throw a punch. He'd taught me how to think strategically, how to read an opponent's weaknesses, and how to stay calm under pressure. Skills that were about to come in handy. Wes Farrow, Ray's gravelly voice came through the phone. Haven't heard from you in ages. You finally ready to get back in the ring? Something like that, Ray. I need some advice. Personal or professional? Both, I think. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Ray's mental gears turning. He'd always been good at reading between the lines. Meet me at Murphy's Diner tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. And Wes, whatever's going on, don't do anything stupid until we talk. I'll try to keep the stupidity to a minimum. That's what I'm afraid of. Sunday morning came gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my mood perfectly. Bree was still asleep when I left for my meeting with Ray, her phone charging on the nightstand beside her. I was tempted to take a look at her messages, but some lines shouldn't be crossed without careful consideration. Not yet, anyway. Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to wake the deceased and breakfast portions that could feed a small family. Ray was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall, old habits from his days as a Chicago cop. You look terrible, he said by way of greeting. Thanks, Ray. You always know just what to say. I slid into the booth across from him and ordered coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Carter administration. Ray waited until she was out of earshot before he spoke again. So what's the story? And don't give me any of that everything's fine garbage. I've seen that look before. Usually right before someone does something they'll regret. I told him everything. The phone call, the motel, the receipts, the sudden changes in Bree's behavior. Ray listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes on a napkin. Denny Powers, he said when I finished. I remember that little punk. Used to come around the gym sometimes, talking big but never willing to actually step in the ring. Yeah, well, apparently he's found a different kind of ring to play in. Ray leaned back in the booth, studying me with the intensity that had made him such an effective interrogator. So what do you want to do about it? I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to drive over to that motel tomorrow and confront them both. Make a scene. Let the whole town know what kind of people they really are. And the other part? I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns that reminded me of storm clouds. The other part wants to be smarter about it, more strategic. Smart is good. Strategic is better. But Wes, you need to be real careful here. Revenge is like a loaded gun. It's just as likely to hurt you as it is your target. I'm not talking about revenge, Ray. I'm talking about consequences. There's a difference. Ray raised an eyebrow. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're getting ready to start a war. I didn't start anything, but I'm sure as heck going to finish it. We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the rain streak down the diner's windows. Finally, Ray pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of his granddaughter's soccer team. You see that little girl in the front row? That's my Emma. She's 8 years old, and last month some punk kids at school were picking on her because she wears glasses. What did she do? She waited, watched, figured out that the main bully, Tommy Morrison, was afraid of spiders. So one day she put a rubber spider in his lunchbox. Kids screamed so loud they heard it in the next county. I couldn't help smiling. Sounds like she takes after her grandfather. The point is, she didn't just lash out. She found his weakness and used it against him. No violence, no permanent damage, but the message was clear. Mess with Emma Martinez at your own risk. And the moral of the story is? Sometimes the best revenge is just showing people who they really are. I left the diner with Ray's words echoing in my head and a plan starting to crystallize. If Bree and Denny wanted to play games, I'd show them what a real player looked like. But first, I needed to do some reconnaissance. The Longview Public Library might not have been much to look at, but it had something invaluable. Free internet access, and a librarian who didn't ask questions about unusual research requests. I spent the afternoon learning everything I could about adultery laws in Indiana, property rights, and the financial obligations of married couples. What I discovered was both encouraging and infuriating. Indiana was a no-fault divorce state, which meant Bree's infidelity wouldn't automatically entitle me to a larger share of our assets. But it also meant I had certain rights as a spouse that she might not be expecting me to exercise. For instance, any major financial decisions, like selling property or taking out loans, required both signatures. And any assets acquired during the marriage were considered joint property, regardless of whose name was on the paperwork. Bree had been handling most of our finances for the past few years, claiming she was better with numbers and paperwork. I'd been happy to let her take care of the boring stuff while I focused on the shop. Now I was wondering what other surprises might be waiting for me in those carefully organized files. I made copies of the relevant legal documents and drove home just as the sun was setting. Bree's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark except for the glow of the television in the living room. I found her on the couch, still in her work clothes, staring at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she saw me, she quickly put the phone aside and smiled. "How was your day?" she asked. The same question she'd asked yesterday, delivered with the same artificial warmth. "Productive. I had lunch with Ray Martinez. You remember Ray?" Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Your old boxing coach? I haven't thought about him in years. How is he?" "Good. We were talking about strategy, how to handle difficult situations." "That's nice." She turned back to the television, but I could tell she wasn't really watching. "I ordered pizza for dinner. It should be here soon." "Sounds perfect." I sat down beside her on the couch, close enough that I could smell the unfamiliar perfume she was wearing. On the television, some reality show was playing out its scripted drama, all manufactured conflict and artificial emotion. Kind of like my marriage, I realized. "Bree," I said, keeping my voice casual. "We should probably talk about our finances soon. I've been thinking about expanding the shop, maybe hiring another mechanic." She stiffened slightly, though she tried to hide it. "That sounds expensive. Are you sure business is good enough to justify the expansion?" "Business is great. Better than it's been in years. I think it's time to start taking some risks, Shake things up a little. I suppose we could look at the numbers next week. I'm pretty busy with the Morrison listing right now." The Morrison listing. That was new. As far as I knew, old Pete Morrison wasn't planning to sell his farm anytime soon. "Big commission?" I asked. "Potentially. It's complicated. Lots of paperwork, legal issues to sort out." I nodded, as if that made perfect sense, but I was already making a mental note to look into the Morrison property. If there was one thing I'd learned about my wife over the years, it was that her lies usually contained a grain of truth. You just had to know how to dig for it. The pizza arrived, and we ate in relative silence, both of us pretending to watch television while actually thinking about other things. Bree kept checking her phone, and I kept wondering what messages she was hoping to receive. Around 10 o'clock, she announced she was going to bed early. "Long day tomorrow," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, me too. I've got that restoration project to finish. She paused at the bottom of the stairs. The blue Camaro? The red Mustang, actually. The one I've been working on for 3 months. Right, of course. She went upstairs, and I heard the bedroom door close. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. Then the hairdryer. Then the sound of dresser drawers opening and closing. All the preparations for another boring day of errands. I waited until the house was completely quiet before I went into the kitchen and opened Bree's laptop. She'd never been particularly careful about computer security, and it took me less than 5 minutes to access her email account. What I found there made me wish I'd started paying attention to our finances a lot sooner. The emails painted a picture I hadn't expected. Yes, there were messages from Denny, flirtatious, inappropriate, and increasingly explicit as the weeks went on. But there were also messages from someone else, someone whose involvement made the whole situation much more complicated. Tasha Milner, Bree's best friend since college, maid of honor at our wedding, and apparently the mastermind behind this entire affair. The earliest email in the chain was dated 6 months ago, right around the time Bree had started acting differently. It was from Tasha, with the subject line, "Time for a change." Bree, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation last week. You're absolutely right. You deserve better than what you're getting. Life is too short to settle for ordinary when you could have extraordinary. I have some ideas about how to shake things up. Call me when you're ready to take control of your happiness. The response from Bree was dated the next day. I don't know, Tash. It feels wrong. Wes is a good man, even if he's not exactly exciting anymore. Tasha's reply was swift and calculated. Good men are a dime a dozen, sweetie. What you need is a man who makes you feel alive again, someone who reminds you what passion feels like. And I know just the guy. From there, the emails chronicled a systematic campaign to destroy my marriage. Tasha had been the one to suggest that Bree reconnect with old friends on social media. She'd been the one to recommend the boutique in Indianapolis. She'd even been the one to suggest the Silver Lake Motel as a discreet meeting place. But the most damaging emails were the recent ones, where Tasha and Bree discussed their long-term plans. Plans that involved me losing everything I'd worked for. The shop is worth at least $200,000, maybe more, Bree had written, and the house should appraise for around $350. If we play this right, I could walk away with enough to start fresh somewhere else. Tasha's response was chilling in its calculation. Don't forget about the retirement accounts and the life insurance policies. You've been married long enough to be entitled to half of everything, and if Wes gets difficult, we can always make things more complicated for him. I still have those photos from the Christmas party 2 years ago. What photos? I tried to remember the Christmas party Tasha was referring to, but the details were fuzzy. I'd had too much to drink that night, something that rarely happened, but Tasha had been particularly insistent about toasting the new year early. I scrolled through more emails, looking for clues, and found something that made my stomach turn. Tasha had been planning this revenge for years, apparently nursing a grudge that dated back to an incident I'd almost forgotten. 5 years ago, Tasha had made a pass at me during one of Bree's real estate conferences. She'd been drinking, claimed she was lonely after her divorce, and suggested we comfort each other while Bree was out of town. I'd turned her down as gently as possible and never mentioned it to Bree, thinking it would only cause problems between the friends. Apparently, Tasha had interpreted my rejection as something more personal. He thinks he's too good for me, she'd written to Bree just last month. Mr. Perfect with his little garage and his boring, predictable life. Well, let's see how perfect he feels when he loses everything that matters to him. I sat back in the kitchen chair, trying to process what I'd just learned. This wasn't just an affair, it was a conspiracy. Tasha had manipulated Bree into betraying our marriage, and now they were planning to financially destroy me in the process. The smart thing would be to print out these emails and take them straight to a lawyer, document everything, file for divorce, and try to protect as many of our assets as possible. But I wasn't feeling particularly smart at the moment. I was feeling like a man who'd been played for a fool by people he'd trusted, and that feeling was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous. I spent the next hour going through our financial records, cross-referencing them with the information in Bree's emails. What I found was even worse than I'd feared. Over the past 3 months, Bree had been systematically moving money out of our joint accounts and into a private account I'd never known existed. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there, but the transfers had been getting larger and more frequent. She'd also taken out a second mortgage on the house without my knowledge, forging my signature on the paperwork. The loan was for $75,000, supposedly for home improvements that had never happened. Where had that money gone? I had a pretty good idea, but I needed proof. I opened a new browser window and looked up Denny Powers' business registration. His fitness consulting company had been incorporated just 4 months ago, with an initial investment of exactly $75,000. My $75,000. The pieces were falling into place now, painting a picture of betrayal that went far deeper than a simple affair. Bree hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been funding her lover's business with money stolen from our joint assets. And Tasha had been coaching her through every step of the process. I printed out the most damaging emails and financial records, storing them in a folder I hid behind my tool cabinet in the garage. Then I went back inside and deleted the browser history, making sure to cover my tracks. Tomorrow was Monday. Bree would be meeting Denny at the motel, thinking she was being clever and discreet. They had no idea that their carefully laid plans were about to encounter some unexpected complications. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face for the first time in months. The next morning, Bree was already up and dressed when I came downstairs for coffee. She was wearing a new outfit, a dress I'd never seen before in a shade of blue that brought out her eyes. Her hair was styled, her makeup was perfect, and she was wearing the expensive perfume she claimed to save for special occasions. "You look nice," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Thank you. I have an important client meeting today." "Anyone I know?" "Just some investors from Indianapolis. Boring stuff, really." She kissed me on the cheek, a quick, perfunctory gesture that felt more like a business transaction than an expression of affection. Then she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'll probably be late tonight," she called over her shoulder. "Don't wait up." I watched through the kitchen window as she backed out of the driveway, noting that she turned left instead of right. Right would have taken her toward downtown and her office. Left led toward the highway and the Silver Lake Motel. I finished my coffee, took a shower, and got dressed for work. But instead of driving straight to the shop, I made a detour. The Silver Lake Motel looked even more depressing in the gray morning light. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few long-term residents and a maintenance truck. I parked across the street behind a cluster of pine trees and settled in to wait. Bree's car arrived first, pulling into a space near the office. She sat in the car for a few minutes, checking her appearance in the rearview mirror, before getting out and walking to the motel office. 10 minutes later, she emerged with a key card and walked up the external staircase to the second floor. Room 237, just as she'd mentioned on the phone. Denny's truck arrived 20 minutes after that, a lifted Chevy with custom paint and enough chrome to blind a pilot. He parked next to Bree's car, looked around nervously, and then jogged up the stairs 2 at a time. I waited another 10 minutes to make sure they were settled, then got out of my car and walked across the street. The motel office was manned by a teenage kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He barely looked up when I walked in, too absorbed in whatever game he was playing on his phone. "Excuse me," I said. "I think my wife might have left her purse in one of your rooms yesterday. Room 237? Could you check for me?" The kid sighed and looked at his computer screen. 237's occupied right now. You could come back later, or I could call up there and ask. "Oh, don't bother them. I'll just wait until they check out." "What time would that be?" "Standard checkout is 11, but they paid for the whole day. Could be any time before tomorrow morning." The whole day. How romantic. I thanked the kid and walked back to my car, but I didn't leave. Instead, I drove around to the back of the motel and parked where I had a clear view of the second-floor walkway. Then I took out my phone and started making calls. The first call was to Ray Martinez. "Ray, it's Wes. Remember that conversation we had about strategy? I think it's time to put some of those lessons to use. What do you need?" "A witness. Someone with law enforcement experience who can document what they observe without getting emotionally involved." There was a pause. "Wes, please tell me you're not about to do something that'll land you in handcuffs." "Nothing illegal, Ray. Just some creative problem solving." "Where and when?" I gave him the address and asked him to bring a camera. Then I made my second call to a number I'd found in Bree's email correspondence. "Morrison Real Estate, this is Janet." "Hi, this is Wes Farrow. I'm calling about the Morrison farm listing. My wife Bree mentioned she was handling the sale." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Farrow, but we don't have any Morrison properties on the market right now. Are you sure you have the right agency?" "Maybe I misunderstood. Thanks anyway." So much for Bree's complicated legal paperwork. My third call was to Denny's business number, which went straight to voicemail. His outgoing message was a masterpiece of self-importance, promising to transform your body and revolutionize your life through his cutting-edge fitness protocols. I left a message. "Hi, Denny. This is Mike from Muscle and Fitness magazine. We're doing a feature on rising stars in the fitness industry, and your name came up. Could you give me a call back? We'd love to set up an interview and photo shoot." That should keep his ego busy for a while. Ray arrived 40 minutes later, driving his old Ford pickup and wearing the kind of serious expression that had probably intimidated countless suspects over the years. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, settling into the passenger seat of my car. "Simple. We wait for them to come out, document their little rendezvous, and then we have a conversation about consequences. And after that? After that, we see how well they handle some unexpected pressure." We didn't have to wait long. Around noon, the door to room 237 opened and Denny emerged, looking around cautiously before jogging down the stairs. He got in his truck and drove away without looking back. Bree came out 15 minutes later, moving more slowly and checking her phone as she walked. She looked satisfied, almost smug, as she got into her car and drove away. "Well," Ray said, lowering his camera, "that was about as subtle as a brick through a window." "Perfect. Now comes the fun part." I drove to the motel office and walked back inside. The same kid was still behind the counter, still playing games on his phone. "Hey," I said, "I was here earlier asking about room 237. I just remembered. My wife's name is Bree Farrow, and she might have registered the room under her name. Could you check your records?" The kid sighed and pecked at his keyboard. "Yeah, here it is. Bree Farrow, room 237, paid cash for one night." "Cash? That's weird. She usually uses a credit card for everything." I slid a $20 bill across the counter. "I don't suppose you could print me a copy of that registration? For insurance purposes?" The kid looked at the 20, then at me, then back at the 20. "I'm not supposed to give out customer information." I added another 20 to the first one. "Like I said, it's my wife. I just need it for our records." 2 minutes later, I walked out of the motel office with a printed copy of Bree's registration, complete with the date, time, and her signature. Ray was waiting in the truck, shaking his head. "You know, in my day, we called that bribery. In my day, we called it a processing fee. Besides, it's not like I asked him to do anything illegal." "Uh-huh. So what's next in this master plan of yours?" "Next, we pay a visit to Tasha Milner. I think it's time she learned what happens when you mess with the wrong family. But first, I had a stop to make at the bank. If Bree wanted to play financial games, it was time to remind her that it takes 2 signatures to tango. The First National Bank of Longview was the kind of institution that still believed in personal service and handwritten ledgers. I'd been banking there for 15 years, and the manager, Carl Patterson, knew me well enough to bend a few rules when necessary. Wes! Carl stood up from behind his desk as I walked into his office. Good to see you. How's business? Can't complain, Carl. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm thinking of expanding the shop, but first I need to get a handle on our finances. Bree's been handling most of the paperwork lately, and I want to make sure I understand where we stand. Carl nodded and pulled up our accounts on his computer. Let's see here. Your joint checking account has a balance of… That's odd. What's odd? Well, 3 months ago you had about $30,000 in checking. Now you're down to just under $4,000. That's a lot of activity for a business account. Can you show me the transaction history? Carl turned his monitor so I could see the screen. The pattern was exactly what I'd expected based on Bree's emails. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, increasing in frequency and amount over the past few weeks. Carl, I need to put a hold on any further transfers from this account. As of today, I want to require dual signatures for any transaction over $500. I can do that, but I'll need Bree to sign off on the change too. Joint account holders have equal access unless both parties agree to restrictions. That's fine. I'll bring her in tomorrow to sign the paperwork. Except I wouldn't be bringing her anywhere. By tomorrow, Bree was going to have much bigger problems to worry about. My next stop was Tasha Milner's house, a modest colonial in one of Longview's nicer neighborhoods. Tasha had done well for herself after her divorce, working as a pharmaceutical sales rep and investing wisely in local real estate. She answered the door wearing yoga pants and a surprised expression. Wes, what are you doing here? Hi, Tasha. I was hoping we could have a chat. Mind if I come in? She hesitated, and I could see her mind working, trying to figure out what I might know and how much trouble she might be in. Of course, she said finally, stepping aside to let me enter. Can I get you some coffee? That would be great. I followed her into the kitchen, noting the expensive appliances and designer fixtures. Business must have been very good lately. So what brings you by? She asked, busying herself with the coffee maker. I've been thinking about Bree a lot lately, about our marriage, about the changes she's been going through. You know her better than anyone. I was hoping you might have some insight. Tasha's hand trembled slightly as she measured coffee grounds. What kind of insight? Well, she's been different lately, more distant, working longer hours, taking more business trips. I'm starting to worry that maybe she's not happy. Marriage is complicated, Wes. Sometimes people just grow apart. Is that what you think is happening? We're growing apart? She turned to face me, and I could see the guilt written all over her features. I don't know. You'd have to ask Bree about that. I plan to. But first, I wanted to ask you about something else. About that Christmas party 2 years ago. All the color drained from her face. What about it? You mentioned some photos in your email to Bree. I'm curious what photos you were referring to. The coffee mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do, Tash. The photos you plan to use against me if I got difficult during the divorce proceedings. The ones you took when I was too drunk to know what was happening. She knelt down and started picking up pieces of broken ceramic, her hands shaking now. Wes, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was me thinking you were my friend, but friends don't try to destroy each other's marriages, do they? I knelt down beside her, close enough that she couldn't avoid looking at me. Here's what's going to happen, Tasha. You're going to tell me exactly what you and Bree have been planning. You're going to give me those photos if they actually exist, and then you're going to help me fix the mess you've made. Or what? I smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. Or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Starting with your boss at the pharmaceutical company. Her face went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. We stared at each other for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her options. Finally, her shoulders sagged in defeat. The photos don't exist, she admitted. I made that up to scare Bree into going along with the plan. What plan, exactly? The divorce, the affair with Denny, all of it. She sat back on her heels, surrounded by broken ceramic. I wanted to hurt you, Wes. When you rejected me that night, it felt like you were saying I wasn't good enough, that I was damaged goods. So you decided to destroy my marriage? I convinced myself that Bree deserved better, that you were holding her back from being truly happy. But really, I just wanted to see you lose something important. The honesty was refreshing, even if the motivation was twisted. And the money? The $75,000 that went to Denny's business? That was Bree's idea. She said if she was going to leave you anyway, she might as well help Denny get established first. She thought of it as an investment in their future together. Their future. I stood up, brushing ceramic dust off my knees. And what about my future? What about our daughter's future? I didn't think about that, she whispered. I was just so angry, so hurt. I wanted someone else to feel as miserable as I did. I looked around the kitchen, taking in the expensive appliances and designer touches. Well, congratulations, Tasha. You succeeded. But now it's time to face the consequences. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd taken of her emails with Bree. I have copies of everything, every message, every plan, every cruel little scheme you two cooked up together. Her face crumpled. What do you want from me? First, I want you to call Bree and tell her the affair is over. Tell her you've changed your mind about the whole thing and she needs to work on saving her marriage. She won't believe me. Make her believe you. Be convincing. Because if you're not, these emails are going to find their way to some very interested parties. And then what? Then you're going to help me show my wife what real consequences look like. I left Tasha's house feeling better than I had in weeks. The conversation had confirmed what I'd suspected. This whole situation was orchestrated by someone with a personal grudge against me. That made it easier to justify what I was planning to do next. But first, I had one more stop to make. Denny's fitness studio was located in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The sign in the window promised personal training, nutritional counseling, and life coaching, but the space looked more like a converted office than a professional gym. I walked in to find Denny doing bicep curls in front of a mirror, wearing a tank top that showed off his admittedly impressive physique. He looked up when the door chimed, and I saw recognition flicker across his face. Well, well, he said, setting down his weights. Wes Farrow. It's been a long time. Not long enough, apparently. He laughed, the same cocky sound I remembered from high school. Still holding grudges after all these years? That's pretty pathetic, even for you. Actually, I'm here on business. I understand you've been providing personal services to my wife. His expression shifted, becoming more cautious. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Room 237 at the Silver Lake Motel. Today around noon. Ring any bells? The color drained from his face, but he tried to maintain his bravado. Even if that were true, what are you going to do about it? You never had the guts to fight your own battles. You're right. I never was much of a fighter. But I've learned a few things over the years about leverage and pressure points. I pulled out a folder and set it on his desk. This is a copy of your business registration. Interesting reading, especially the part about your initial investment of $75,000. So, I had investors. Just one investor, actually. My wife. Using money she stole from our joint accounts. He opened the folder and scanned the documents, his face growing paler with each page. This doesn't prove anything. Maybe not in court, but it's going to be very interesting reading for the IRS when they audit your business next month. You can't do that. Watch me. I leaned forward, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. Here's the thing, Denny. I know you're not actually successful. This whole fitness influencer thing is just smoke and mirrors, isn't it? You're living off credit cards and borrowed money, trying to fake it until you make it. That's not true. Then you won't mind when I share your real financial situation with your social media followers. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to learn that their fitness guru can't even afford to pay his own rent. He slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him. What do you want? I want you to disappear from my wife's life, permanently. No more phone calls, no more motel meetings, no more playing house with my money. And if I don't? I smiled and stood up. Then you'll discover just how creative I can be when someone threatens my family. I left him sitting there, staring at the documents and probably calculating how much trouble he was in. It was a good start, but I wasn't finished yet. The real confrontation was still to come. I spent the rest of Monday afternoon preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my marriage. I organized all the evidence I'd gathered, the emails, the financial records, the motel registration, the photographs Ray had taken, everything laid out in chronological order, telling a story that even Bree wouldn't be able to deny. But evidence was only part of the equation. I also needed to be ready for her reaction, her excuses, her attempts to turn the situation around and make me the villain. After 16 years of marriage, I knew how her mind worked when she was cornered. She came home around 7, carrying takeout from the Chinese restaurant downtown. Her hair was slightly mussed, her lipstick was gone, and she had that particular glow that comes from an afternoon of illicit activity. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not meeting my eyes. The meeting ran longer than expected. How did it go? Fine. Boring mostly. Just a lot of paperwork and legal details. She busied herself setting out the food, chattering about nothing in particular. It was a performance I'd seen before. Bree always talked more when she was nervous about something. "Where's Lila tonight?" I asked. "Study group at Madison's house. She'll be home around 10. Perfect. That gave us plenty of time for a private conversation. We ate in relative silence, both of us pretending to watch the news while actually thinking about other things. Finally, when the containers were empty and there were no more distractions available, I decided it was time. "Bree, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have warned her because she looked up sharply. "About what?" "About your meeting today, the one that wasn't with investors from Indianapolis." Her face went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "Sure you do." I pulled out the folder of evidence and set it on the table between us. "Room 237 at the Silver Lake Motel. You paid cash, checked in around 11:30, and your boyfriend arrived 20 minutes later." She stared at the folder as if it might explode. "Wes, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You've always been good with explanations. But before you start, you should probably see the rest of this." I opened the folder and spread out the contents. The printed emails, the financial records, the photographs of her and Denny entering and leaving the motel room. Her face grew paler with each document. "This is all taken out of context," she said finally. "You don't understand the whole situation." "Then explain it to me. Explain how you and Tasha have been planning to destroy our marriage for 6 months. Explain how you stole $75,000 from our joint accounts to fund your boyfriend's fake business. Explain how you were going to use fabricated evidence to humiliate me during divorce proceedings." "The photos don't exist," she said quickly. "Tasha made that up." "I know. She told me this afternoon, right after I showed her copies of all your emails." Bree's composure finally cracked. "You went to see Tasha?" "I went to see everyone involved in this little conspiracy. Tasha, Denny, the bank manager, the motel clerk. I've been having a very educational day." She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of remorse or frustration. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "It started as just, I don't know, a fantasy, something to make me feel alive again." "And the money? Was that part of the fantasy too?" "Denny needed help getting his business started. I thought if we were going to be together anyway, it made sense to invest in our future." With my money? It was our money, Wes. Community property. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Community property that you stole without my knowledge or consent. That's called embezzlement, Bree. You're being dramatic. It's not like we couldn't afford it. That's not the point, and you know it. The point is that you betrayed every promise you ever made to me. You lied, you cheated, you stole, and you involved our daughter in your schemes. Lila doesn't know anything about this. Doesn't she? Because according to your emails with Tasha, you've been using her to spy on me, asking her about my schedule, my plans, my state of mind. Bree's face flushed. I was trying to protect her. I didn't want her to get caught in the middle of our problems. By destroying her family? By teaching her that marriage vows are meaningless and that it's acceptable to lie to people who love you? You don't understand what it's been like for me, she said, her voice rising. Living in this town, married to someone who's perfectly content with mediocrity. Do you know what people say about us? About you? No, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me. They say you're a nice guy, but not very ambitious. They say I could have done better, that I settled for security instead of passion. And they're right, Wes. I did settle. The words hit harder than I'd expected, but I kept my expression neutral. So this is my fault? I forced you to have an affair and steal money? I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying I was unhappy. And when Tasha suggested that maybe I deserved more excitement in my life, it made sense. And Denny was the excitement you were looking for? He made me feel beautiful again, desired, like I was worth taking risks for. I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd loved for 16 years, and realized that I was looking at a stranger. The Bree I'd married would never have justified betrayal with self-pity. So what happens now? I asked. I don't know. What do you want to happen? It was a good question. What did I want? A week ago, I would have said I wanted to save our marriage, to find a way to work through our problems and rebuild what we'd lost. Now, looking at the evidence of her deception spread across our kitchen table, I realized that what I really wanted was justice. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, I said. I want you to experience what it feels like to lose everything that matters to you, the same way you were planning to do to me. What does that mean? I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd raised our daughter and built what I'd thought was a good life. It means that tomorrow morning, you're going to call Denny and end whatever relationship you think you have with him. You're going to call Tasha and tell her that her services as a marriage counselor are no longer needed. And then you're going to figure out how to return the $75,000 you stole from our accounts. And if I don't? Then I file for divorce and make sure everyone in this town knows exactly why. I submit these financial records to the district attorney's office and let them decide whether charges should be filed. And I make sure that Lila understands that her mother chose to destroy her family for the sake of a middle-aged fitness instructor with delusions of grandeur. Bree was crying now, but they were angry tears rather than remorseful ones. You can't do this to me, Wes. I won't let you. You don't have a choice. You made your decisions and now you get to live with the consequences. I'll fight you. I'll hire a lawyer, contest everything. I'll make this as difficult and expensive as possible. With what money? The accounts are frozen as of this afternoon. Any major expenditures require both our signatures now. Her face went white. You can't do that. I already did. And before you think about running to Denny for financial support, you should know that he's probably going to be dealing with some legal issues of his own very soon. What did you do? Nothing illegal. I just made sure the right people became aware of some interesting discrepancies in his business filings. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I don't know who you are anymore. Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you. The front door opened, and we heard Lila's voice calling out that she was home. Bree quickly wiped her eyes and started gathering up the evidence I'd spread across the table. "We'll finish this conversation later," she said quietly. "No," I said, taking the documents from her hands. "We're finished now. The only question is whether you're going to make this easy or difficult for everyone involved." Lila appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking back and forth between us with the instinctive awareness that teenagers have for family tension. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Bree said, forcing a smile. "Your father and I were just discussing some boring financial stuff." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and realized that she was almost an adult now, old enough to understand that her parents' marriage was in serious trouble. She deserved better than lies and false reassurances. "Actually, Lila," I said, "your mother and I are having some problems. We're going to need to make some changes as a family." "What kind of changes?" she asked, her voice small. "We're not sure yet. But whatever happens, it won't change how much we both love you." Bree shot me a look that could have melted steel, but she didn't contradict me. Maybe she realized that the time for pretending was over. "I'm going upstairs," Lila said quietly. "Let me know if you need anything." After she left, Bree and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, not speaking. Finally, she broke the silence. "How long have you known?" "About the affair, since Saturday night. About the rest of it, since this morning." "And you spent all day planning your revenge." "I spent all day gathering facts and considering my options. The revenge part was your idea, remember? I'm just making sure it doesn't go according to plan." She nodded slowly, as if finally accepting that her carefully orchestrated scheme had collapsed. "So what happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, you start making things right, and we figure out whether there's anything left of our marriage worth saving." "Is there?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still capable of charm when she wanted to be. But the trust was gone, and without trust, everything else was just window dressing. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I guess we're about to find out." That night we slept in the same bed for what I suspected might be the last time. Bree lay on her side with her back to me, and I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the choices that had brought us to this point. In the morning, everything would change. But for now, in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I allowed myself to grieve for the marriage that was ending and the future that would never be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and painful decisions. But it would also bring the possibility of something better. A life built on honesty instead of deception, on respect instead of betrayal. I fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 3 weeks later, I was in my garage working on a 1969 Dodge Charger when Ray Martinez stopped by with coffee and donuts from Murphy's Diner. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling onto a stool beside my workbench. "Better than expected," I said, wiping grease off my hands. "Different than I thought it would be, but better." The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of lawyers, mediators, and difficult conversations. Bree had initially tried to fight the divorce, claiming that I was being vindictive and unreasonable. But when her attorney saw the evidence I'd compiled, he'd advised her to cooperate fully and hope for the best possible outcome. The financial settlement had been surprisingly straightforward. Bree agreed to return the $75,000 she'd taken, using money from her own retirement account. I kept the house and the business, she kept her car, and half of our remaining assets. Most importantly, we'd worked out a custody arrangement for Lila that put her needs first. "What about the other players in this drama?" Ray asked. "How are they handling their new circumstances?" I smiled grimly. Tasha got fired from her pharmaceutical job when her boss learned about her involvement in the scheme. Apparently, companies don't like employees who engage in fraud and conspiracy. She's moved back to Chicago to live with her sister while she looks for work. And the fitness guru? Denny's business folded after the IRS audit revealed some interesting discrepancies in his tax filings. Turns out he'd been inflating his income and claiming deductions for equipment he never actually purchased. He's working at a chain gym now, teaching spin classes for $12 an hour. Ray chuckled. Sounds like justice was served all around. Justice is a funny thing, I said. I thought I wanted revenge, but what I really wanted was for people to face the consequences of their choices. There's a difference. And what about you? Any consequences for your choices? It was a fair question. My actions over those 3 weeks hadn't been entirely noble. I'd been calculating, ruthless even, in the way I'd dismantled the conspiracy against my marriage. Some people in town thought I'd been too harsh, that I should have tried harder to work things out with Bree. I sleep better at night, I said. I know that sounds simple, but it's true. For months, I felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Now I know the truth, and I can deal with reality instead of living in someone else's lie. That's worth something. It's worth everything. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the morning traffic pass by outside. Finally, Ray stood up and stretched. I should get going, but Wes, I'm proud of how you handled this whole situation. You could have let it destroy you, but instead, you took control and made it work for you. After he left, I went back to work on the Charger. It was a complete restoration project. Engine, transmission, bodywork, interior, everything. The kind of job that would take months to complete, but would result in something beautiful and valuable when it was finished. Kind of like rebuilding a life, I thought. Around noon, Lila stopped by the shop. She'd been spending more time with me since the divorce proceedings began, and I suspected she was trying to make sure I wasn't falling apart without her mother around. "How's the car coming along?" she asked, peering under the hood. Slowly but surely. "Want to help me install this carburetor?" She wrinkled her nose. "I'll stick to watching, thanks. I don't want to get grease under my fingernails." We worked together in companionable silence, her asking questions about the restoration process while I explained the intricacies of classic car mechanics. It was peaceful, normal even, in a way that family time hadn't been for months. "Dad," she said eventually, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, sweetheart." "Are you angry at Mom?" I set down my wrench and considered the question carefully. Lila deserved an honest answer, but she also deserved to maintain a relationship with her mother. "I was angry," I said finally. I was hurt and disappointed and confused. But mostly, I was sad that she felt like she had to lie instead of talking to me about whatever was making her unhappy. "Do you think you'll ever get back together?" "No, honey. I don't think we will. Too much has happened. Too much trust has been broken. But that doesn't mean we can't both be good parents to you, even if we're not married to each other anymore." She nodded, processing this information with the resilience that teenagers somehow manage to summon when their world gets turned upside down. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you did the right thing. Mom was acting weird for months, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. At least now we know why. How do you feel about everything that's happened?" "Relieved, mostly. I know that sounds terrible, but the tension in the house was getting really bad. Now at least everyone can stop pretending everything is fine." Smart kid. Smarter than her parents, apparently. That evening, I was closing up the shop when Bree's car pulled into the parking lot. She got out slowly, as if she wasn't sure she wanted to be there, and walked over to where I was standing. "Hi," she said. "Hi. I wanted to talk to you about something. About us, I mean. About what happens next." I locked the shop door and turned to face her. She looked different. Older, maybe, or just tired. The past 3 weeks had been hard on everyone involved. "Okay," I said. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about what you said that night in the kitchen, about actions and consequences, about what it means to lose everything that matters to you." And? You were right. I did lose everything that mattered. My marriage, my family, my best friend, even my sense of who I thought I was. And it was my own fault. I waited for her to continue, not sure where this conversation was heading. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I don't even deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. What we had wasn't ordinary or boring or any of the other things I convinced myself it was. It was real, and it was good, and I destroyed it for something that was neither. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe you the truth. All of it. Including the part where I admit that Tasha was right about one thing. I was jealous of what you'd built here. Your business, your reputation, the respect people have for you. I wanted that for myself, but instead of working for it, I tried to tear you down. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, maybe years. I appreciate you telling me that, I said, but it doesn't change anything. I know. I'm not asking for another chance, Wes. I'm just asking for the opportunity to be a better person going forward, for Lila's sake, if nothing else. I looked at her standing there in the fading daylight, this woman who had been such a huge part of my life for so long, and felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. I think we can manage that, I said. She smiled, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of the person I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Thank you, she said, for everything, even for the parts that hurt. After she left, I stood in the parking lot for a long time, thinking about second chances and new beginnings. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of traffic on the highway. People going places, starting over, moving forward with their lives. I had a business to run, a daughter to raise, and a future to build. It wasn't the future I'd planned 3 weeks ago, but it was mine, and it was honest, and it was enough. I got in my truck and drove home to the house that was finally, truly mine, ready to see what tomorrow would bring. The charger restoration would take months to complete, but I had time, and patience, and the knowledge that some things, once broken, can be rebuilt even stronger than before. It was going to be a good project.